Christmas Eve, 1839, Carter Plantation, Louisiana. Christmas was meant to bring peace, but that night in Louisiana, peace died beneath an axe. The air was still, unnaturally so. Cypress trees lined the muddy banks of the bayou like silent mourners. Fog clung low to the ground, curling around roots and rotting fence posts like pale fingers from the grave. Above, a few stars blinked, too distant to care. Below, the Carter Plantation held its breath. From the grand big house, candlelight spilled through curtained windows in soft flickers. Inside, white men toasted each other with brandy. The scent of roasted duck and sugared pecans floated through the night air, carried on the same wind that stirred the smoke from chimneys and the faint echo of hymns. Peace on earth, goodwill toward men. The voices sang strong, proud, hypocritical. In the slave quarters there was no singing, only whispers, children huddled near hearthstones for warmth. Old women folded scraps of cloth into makeshift gifts. Men stared into the fire with eyes dulled by years, but one figure sat apart still, silent, sharp. Dinah Carter had not spoken all day. She had risen before dawn, prepared the feast, plucked the birds, kneaded the dough, brewed the cider. She carried out every task with the precision of habit, her eyes lowered, her lips sealed. Not once did she falter, not once did she wince when one of the sons barked at her or when the master smacked her backside in passing, chuckling as if it were a joke. She moved like a shadow through the house, unnoticed by those who thought they owned her. But inside her something waited, not rage, not anymore. Rage had burned through her long ago. What remained was colder, sharper, something forged over years of silence, hammered beneath grief and humiliation. The kind of silence that didn't break, it sharpened. Outside, a single bell rang out from the big house porch to mark the hour. Midnight. The Christ child was born, the master had said earlier, and the world would know peace. Dinah Carter stood from her stool in the shadows. Her apron was stained with wine and sweat, her hands rough and red from the day's labor. She looked toward the tool shed beyond the fields. Peace was not coming, but judgment was. Carter Plantation, Louisiana, morning to dusk, Christmas Eve, 1839. The Carter Plantation came alive before the sun ever crested the moss-choked treetops. Cold breath spilled from slave mouths in the dawn chill. Boots sloshed through dew-wet mud, and iron pots clanged to life over open flames. Christmas or not, there was work to be done, and it began in darkness. In the quarters, the smell of wood smoke clung to skin and cotton. Children stirred from sleep on straw pallets, already coughing from the cold. Mothers tied rags around their heads and bodies, layering thin fabric against a winter that bit harder without shoes. There were no gifts here, only aching joints, raw hands, and the same whispered prayers. Keep us safe, let them look the other way today. Up the gravel path, past the smokehouse and carriage barn, the big house beamed with holiday splendor. Garlands of pine and red ribbon wrapped around the columns like vines choking a tree. Inside, oil lamps cast golden halos across polished floors. The air smelled of honeyed ham, duck fat, cloves, and bourbon. Every room dripped with luxury and music fiddles, laughter, clinking glasses, and the occasional clatter of a wine bottle knocked over in drunken cheer. The Carters hosted 12 guests that year, planters from Baton Rouge, militia captains from Lafayette, and cotton traders from New Orleans. They spoke of markets and railroads, but always over cigars and roasted chestnuts. The word Christmas came often from their mouths, but it held no holiness. It was just another excuse to eat, drink, and command. Behind the kitchen wall, Dinah stirred the gravy without blinking, her mind elsewhere. The cook's hearth roared all day, fed by kindling split by small hands and calloused palms. Boys and girls, barely tall enough to reach the counter, were slapped and scolded until sweat poured like broth. Bones were picked clean, nothing wasted, but none for them. Only when the masters had eaten their fill did the scraps come down. Cold biscuits, gristle, burnt pies. One of the Carter sons tossed a half-gnawed turkey leg to the dogs outside while a child begged for cornbread behind the shed. Above it all, the illusion of festivity. Below it, despair worn so long it had become muscle memory. And in the center of it, Dinah Carter moved silently, watching everything. Waiting. Christmas had come to Carter Plantation, but not joy, not yet. Dinah Carter, the quiet flame behind the hearth. Dinah Carter had been on this earth for 36 winters, though no one on the plantation could say for sure. No Bible recorded her birth, no father had ever claimed her. Her mother, long buried in unmarked soil beyond the sugarcane rows, had once called her son Quiet, a child who rarely cried but stared too long, too deep. By trade, Dinah was both cook and laundress, a woman whose hands bore the scars of 2 fires, hearth flames, and human cruelty. From sunrise to nightfall, her days were filled with steam, boiling pots, ash-stained sleeves, and endless scrubbing. She was never idle, never outspoken, never late. If the master said jump, she jumped. If a son barked her name, she answered before the second syllable. On the surface, she was what they wanted, a docile thing, but only the surface. Dinah spoke little, and when she did, it was in clipped yeses and nos. Her voice was soft, dry as cotton left too long in the sun. But her silence wasn't emptiness, it was calculation, every insult tucked away, every slap logged, every cruelty her eyes witnessed she recorded in a place no lash could touch. She carried burdens like stones inside her, silent and heavy. When other women broke down, she held them. When children were dragged off crying, she whispered their names into rags and tucked them in the eaves of the washroom roof, tiny prayers she never expected answered. And when the master's sons laughed at the sight of her walking barefoot through snow-slicked mud to deliver food, she did not look away. She memorized their faces. There was something about her eyes. They did not beg, they did not lower, they did not shimmer like frightened things. They burned. The overseer said she had a witch's quiet. The mistress once claimed she found Dinah praying to something African in the laundry room, though she'd only been kneeling beside a broken pipe, weeping without sound. They called her strange, they called her distant, they feared her just enough to keep her close but not too close. She wore obedience like a cloak, but beneath it she was all blade. And that Christmas Eve, as the plantation swelled with drunken music and hymnals, Dinah stood near the stove, hands folded, eyes locked on the shadows beyond the window. She was done keeping count. The time had come to settle the ledger. The Carters, lords of the land, tyrants of flesh. Thomas Carter was once called a gentleman by his peers, back when his suit still fit and his name held sway at cotton markets in New Orleans. But time had pickled him. What remained was a swollen man with whiskey breath, a voice like gravel, and eyes that never looked at a black face without the curl of contempt. He fancied himself a patriarch, a father to the faithful and the fearful, as he liked to say during plantation sermons. But beneath that sermonizing drawl was a tyrant without conscience. His word was law and his punishment was creative. He once made a boy dig a hole for 3 days straight as penance for breaking a plate, then filled the hole with pig's blood and forced him to sleep beside it, to learn the weight of waste, Thomas had said. But if Thomas was the rod at the root, his 4 sons were the branches that lashed out. William, the eldest, bore his father's sneer and none of his cunning. A drunk like the old man, he took pleasure in beatings. His whip, braided tight with nails at the tip, was nicknamed Mercy. Slaves whispered that no mercy ever came from it. John, second born, was quieter, more charming, but his was a cruelty of calculation. He selected women from the quarters like one selects ripe fruit. He spoke softly to them, brought sugar cubes, even called them sweetheart, until the door closed. Then came the screams. He favored virgins and broke them like glass. Matthew the third was the fool of the family, but even fools have knives. He liked games, tying chickens to children and calling it sport, forcing old men to dance in the sun until they collapsed. He once made Dinah sing Silent Night while the mistress watched her daughter give birth on the laundry floor, silent and pale, the child already taken. And Henry, the youngest, was the most dangerous of all because he still believed he was good. He led prayer on Sundays, wore a cross of gold, and read from the Bible while barefoot slaves knelt outside the parlor. But his sermons ended with blood. His Christmas gift each year was selecting one slave to punish publicly, to cleanse the spirit for the Savior's birth. They sang hymns with lips stained in wine, while the people they owned bled and bent beneath frost and fire. The Carters wore the name of Christ on their tongues, but they served only power. Omen in the air, stillness in her hands, something foul rode the wind that week, though no one dared say it aloud. Air thick with the scent of pine smoke and fatback grease carried with it a silence too heavy for celebration. Crows had begun to gather, dozens of them black as ash, circling low over the fields near the slave quarters. They didn't caw, didn't scatter, they watched. Old Jonah, the quarter's elder, said the birds meant death. Not for us, he whispered, but for them who think they above dying. The firewood snapped louder than usual in the pit behind the cookhouse. Each log split with a crack like bone. Dinah chopped slowly, deliberately. She never looked up. When she carried the wood inside, she passed beneath strings of holly and ribbons tied to door frames, decorations hung by enslaved hands for a feast they wouldn't touch. Inside the big house, preparations for the Christmas Eve dinner had turned into a carnival of cruelty. The Carter sons drank hard and early. By mid-afternoon, William had already knocked over a punch bowl and laughed as it soaked a passing housemaid's dress. John took to playing the piano while glaring at Dinah, his tune clumsy but threatening. "Play us something pretty," he sneered. "You know any songs from the jungle?" At the hearth, scraps of roast duck and sweet potatoes were tossed to the dogs lounging near the fire. Henry ripped the leg off a goose and threw it across the room, cackling as the dogs tore at it. Dinah stood still beside the serving tray, hands at her sides, face unreadable. No one noticed the small knife she cleaned too carefully earlier that morning. No one asked why she stepped outside alone for 10 minutes after folding the linen napkins, nor why she returned with wet boots and no lantern. In the slave quarters, whispers drifted like smoke. "The South'll rise in blood. You hear about what happened down by Red River," they fought back, but the whispers died quickly. Eyes darted to the fields, to the woods, to the sky, and always back to the big house where a single wrong glance could cost a life. Only Dinah listened without fear. She did not speak, did not echo the rumors. She simply sharpened what was hers to sharpen, hung her laundry, stirred her pots, and watched them feast, watched them laugh, watched the firewood split and the crows gather, and waited. What Christmas took from her, there was a time when Dinah believed in holy days. Her mother, before she faded into the fields, used to whisper stories of stars that guided the lost, of angels that visited the poor. Christmas Eve, they'd hum low hymns together, quietly, carefully, while hanging bits of thread and bone on a branch by the washroom door. A sacred tree of their own, stitched from memory and scraps. That was before everything was taken. Dinah met Elijah when she was barely 16. He worked the cane fields, broad-shouldered, always singing. He made her laugh, even in the worst heat. When they jumped the broom beneath a sycamore tree, no papers were signed, no preacher blessed it, but their hands had meant it. And in that kind of love there was something divine. 3 years later, Elijah was dead. He dared to speak up when Overseer Cobb struck an old man for dropping a tool. Just words, ain't no call to hit him like that. But that was enough. Cobb dragged him behind the smokehouse, and by sundown Elijah's back was pulp and his breath was gone. Dinah was made to wash the blood from the boards. She buried him with no marker, just a stone and her silence. Then came the child, Letty. Bright, curious, always asking why the sun burned and the stars hid. Dinah tried to protect her, but when Letty turned 12, Mistress Ann said she had a light look, that she'd fetch a fine price in New Orleans. 2 weeks later, a trader came with coin and ink, and her daughter was loaded onto a cart like furniture. Dinah chased after it barefoot, screaming until her voice broke. She never saw her again. After that, something went quiet inside her. Not broken, just buried. And in its place, a silence deeper than any prayer. Then came the sons, first John, then William, sometimes one, sometimes more, always after dark, always behind locked doors, and always followed by laughter. Each year, Christmas returned like salt in a wound. The master would gather his family and slaves, read from the book of Luke, and say, "This day a Savior is born." They'd eat roasted duck and sip cider while Dinah stood nearby, the ghost in her own life. But Christmas no longer meant hope to Dinah. It meant theft, it meant blood, and it meant that on the holiest night of the year the devil wore a cross and smiled. The song before the silence by candlelight, the feast stretched long into the evening. The dining table groaned beneath the weight of opulence, roast duck glistening with glaze, silver platters of ham and oysters, sugared apples piled high beside custards and bourbon-soaked cakes. The guests were full, drunk, and loud, their cheeks flushed from whiskey and wine. Their laughter rolled through the halls like thunder over a grave. Dinah moved among them with her usual silence, clearing bones, refilling goblets, ignoring the hands that brushed too close. Her dress, an old muslin frock with heat stains and torn stitching, stuck to her skin with sweat. She had not eaten since dawn. At the head of the table, Henry raised his glass. "Now, brothers," he said, "what's a good Christian feast without music?" William leaned back in his chair, eyes heavy-lidded. "Dinah," he slurred, "give us a carol." She hesitated, plate in hand. John grinned, "Don't make us ask twice." Dinah set the plate down, eyes cast low. She cleared her throat, lips trembling not with fear but something colder. She began, her voice thin and cracked. "Silent night, holy night." The men burst into mocking applause. Louder, someone jeered, "Like you mean it." When her voice wavered on the third verse, William slammed his fist on the table, making silverware jump. "You call that singing?" he shouted. John stood, staggered around the table, and grabbed the wine decanter. With a flourish, he poured it straight down the front of her dress. The red spread like a wound, soaking the cotton to her skin. "There, now you look festive," he laughed. The table roared. Dinah stood motionless, the wine dripping from her bodice, pooling at her bare feet. Her hands twitched at her sides. Slowly, she raised one to brush a curl from her face. The candlelight caught the wet stain on her dress, and for a brief moment she looked like a woman bathed in blood. Henry leaned in close, his voice thick with condescension. "Go clean yourself up, Dinah. We'll call you when we need dessert." She did not answer. She turned without a word, walked slowly to the kitchen, and closed the door behind her. There in the heat of the hearth, she gripped the edge of the counter with both hands. Her knuckles turned white. Her breath slowed. Outside, the Carters laughed. Inside, her hands had stopped trembling, not from fear, but from resolve. The axe and the name beneath her breath, the plantation slept beneath a blanket of false peace. Midnight came without a bell. The candles in the big house had guttered out, the guests slumped in drunken heaps near the hearth. The last hymn had long since faded into snores and crackling embers. Even the dogs lay still, bellies full, ears twitching at imagined sounds, but Dinah did not sleep. She moved like mist, soundless, slow, certain, past the cookhouse, past the barrels of rainwater, through the fog that licked the ground like a warning. She didn't carry a lantern, she didn't need one, her feet knew the path in the dark. The tool shed stood crooked beneath a cypress tree, its door held shut by a rusted latch and the weight of disuse. Dinah slipped inside and let the shadows swallow her. The air inside smelled of old wood and oil. Spiderwebs trembled in the corners. Hooks lined the walls, saws, mallets, rust-bitten shovels, but her hand reached for only one thing, the axe. It was heavier than she remembered. Long-handled, iron-bladed, used to split logs for winter hearths. She tested its balance. It would do. She knelt before the workbench, lit a stub of tallow candle, and set the blade to stone. The whetstone rasped with slow rhythm, back and forth, each scrape singing like bone on bone. Sparks leapt in soft bursts, lighting her face in flickers. Half her face glowed in amber, the other was buried in black. She did not flinch when her finger nicked on the edge. The blood that welled was warm, real. She wiped it across the handle. "Elijah," she whispered, eyes never leaving the blade. Her husband's name hung in the air like a breath held too long. "Letty," she said next, softer. The name of her daughter, stolen, never returned. She ran her thumb along the sharpening edge, clean, razor sharp. "They don't get to keep your names," she whispered. "They don't get to sing while you rot." Outside, the wind stirred the trees. A crow gave a single cry, then went silent. Dinah rose. The axe hung easily in her hands now, an extension of her will, of her silence made solid. She blew out the candle, stepped into the darkness once more. The blade gleamed once in the moonlight, then vanished. The axe sang louder than the choir. The big house was quiet when Dinah stepped inside, axe in hand. The door creaked on its hinges, but no one stirred. The smell of cinnamon and smoke still clung to the halls, mingling now with the coppery scent of something yet to come. A fire still crackled in the parlor hearth. Thomas Carter, the master, lay in a chair before it, head back, mouth open, belly rising with thick, slurred snores. His boots were kicked off and his hands hung limp over the armrests like he'd already surrendered to death. Dinah stepped behind him, slow as Sunday. She raised the axe with both hands, her arms steady. She did not pray. She did not cry. The first strike split his skull clean from crown to jaw. Bone cracked, teeth clattered against the hearthstone. Blood sprayed the garland above the mantel, painting the holly berries a darker red. The second blow severed what was left. He never woke. She moved through the hall, boots squelching on floorboards now slick. Her breath was calm. She left no prints, just smears. Upstairs, the sons dreamed. William was face down in his bed, boots still on, shirt open. A half-empty bottle of rum sat on the nightstand. Dinah stood over him, watched his back rise and fall. One stroke, the axe bit deep between his shoulder blades, splitting spine. He spasmed once. She struck again and he stopped moving. John's room was next. He stirred as she entered, blinking groggily. Who was all he got out. The axe swung sideways this time, catching jaw and neck. He fell from the bed with a thud, blood gurgling from what had once been his voice. His cross necklace clinked softly against the floor. Matthew was in the tub, soaked in lavender water, snoring loud enough to wake the devil himself. Dinah stepped to the edge of the basin, looked down at his pale, floating belly. The axe rose. The water turned red. Henry's room was last. He wasn't asleep. He was on his knees at the window, mumbling verses to the night sky, hands pressed in prayer. He turned when he heard her, saw the axe, saw the blood on her dress. Opened his mouth, perhaps to beg, perhaps to bless. Dinah didn't care. The blade struck the side of his head, then again and again. He crumpled beneath the window where the choir outside was still faintly singing. Joy to the world, but inside there was no joy, only judgment and the rhythm of steel on flesh, measured, cold, unforgiving. The morning the sun refused to shine, the first scream came from Elsie, the housemaid, when she stepped into the parlor just after dawn with a tray of coffee. The tray clattered to the floor, shattering porcelain across the blood-slick wood. Her scream pierced the still morning like a blade. Then came the running, boots pounding up the stairs, doors flying open, gasps turning to shrieks. Within minutes, the overseers came galloping from the barns, rifles in hand, confusion in their eyes. The Carter estate had risen like any other morning, but now the big house wept red. Blood trickled down the front steps, pooling into the frost-bitten lawn like a sacrifice. Word spread fast, the master's dead. All 4 boys, too. A woman did it with an axe in the slave quarters. The whispers curled tighter than smoke. Some froze in their tracks, too stunned to breathe. Others packed what little they had and fled into the woods, the swamp swallowing their footprints like a secret. A few dropped to their knees, not in grief, but in awe. She did it. She really did it. How servants stumbled through the carnage like sleepwalkers, pressing hands to mouths, sobbing, trembling. One of the cooks fainted in the hallway. Another dropped to his knees before the blood-soaked staircase, muttering a prayer with eyes wide in disbelief. And there at the center of it all stood Dinah. She did not run, she did not hide. She stood at the base of the grand staircase, the axe still in her hands, her apron soaked through with blood. Her face was unreadable, neither wild nor weeping. Her eyes were calm, unblinking. If anyone had looked closely, they would have seen it. Peace, not joy, not triumph. Just a silence that no longer trembled. The overseers approached slowly, rifles raised, boots crunching glass and gore. One shouted for her to drop the weapon. Another whispered she ain't even blinkin'. Dinah turned her gaze toward them, said nothing. The axe slipped from her fingers, landing with a soft, wet thud at her feet. She lifted her chin. She would not kneel. She would not beg. She had carved judgment into the bones of the guilty, and now stood among the ruins of men who thought themselves gods. The woman who would not bow, they bound Dinah in iron the way they had bound her all her life, wrists shackled, ankles chained, collar locked tight around her neck. But this time she did not lower her head. She walked barefoot through the mud of the parish road, the axe gone but the blood still staining her dress, dried into stiff brown patches. Behind her trailed whispers. The news had spread faster than fire in cane fields. A slave woman had butchered Thomas Carter and his 4 sons on Christmas Eve. Some called it madness, others called it blasphemy. But in the back corners of taverns and among the hush of fields, another word was muttered: justice. At the courthouse, 12 white men sat in judgment. Not one was a stranger to the Carters. They traded cotton with them, drank whiskey with them, hunted alongside them. The trial lasted less than a day. Witnesses recounted the scene. Overseers swore they found her holding the axe. There was no lawyer, no defense, no mercy. When asked if she had anything to say, Dinah only lifted her eyes. They expected tears, excuses, madness. Instead, they found a silence that cut sharper than her blade. She stared at them, calm, unblinking, as though she were the judge and they the guilty. One juror shifted uncomfortably. Another cleared his throat. A third refused to meet her gaze at all. The verdict was decided before sunrise: guilty. Sentence: death by hanging at first light. Some argued for burning to make an example. Others said hanging was quicker. In the end, it did not matter. They marched her to the gallows on the edge of town, where the oak trees bent low and the ground still bore scars from old ropes. A crowd gathered, drawn by morbid hunger. Children perched on shoulders, women clutched shawls, men shouted curses and scripture. Dinah stood upon the platform, rope looped around her neck, the morning sun striking her face. She did not tremble, she did not weep. When asked for final words, she said nothing. She only turned her eyes skyward, as though searching for the daughter stolen from her, the husband buried without a name. The lever dropped, the rope snapped taut, and a hush fell over the crowd. Not relief, not righteousness, unease, because even in death, Dinah Carter's silence felt louder than their verdict. It clung to the air like a curse, reminding them that judgment had already been delivered, by her hands, not theirs. Acts that would not rest years bled into decades, and the name Dinah Carter was scrubbed from ledgers, whispered only in shameful corners of white parlors. But the story refused to die. It traveled like smoke across parishes, carried in riverboats and work songs, whispered over campfires and between the rows of cane. To some, she was a madwoman. To others, she was proof that even the weakest hands could cut down the mighty. But in Louisiana's bayous, she became something else entirely: a legend. They called her the Christmas Axe Woman. Children dared each other to run up the Carter property on Christmas Eve. The old house, once proud and whitewashed, rotted almost overnight after the massacre. Its shutters sagged, its roof sank, vines clawed through broken windows. Locals swore no family would buy it, no preacher would bless it, no plow would turn its soil. They said the land itself refused the Carter name. Hunters trudging through the swamp told of strange sounds when the calendar struck December 24th. In the dead hour before midnight, they heard it, the dull rhythm of axe strokes echoing through the pines. Some claimed they saw sparks in the dark, as if iron struck stone. Others swore they glimpsed a woman's shadow moving through the fog, apron soaked red, carrying a blade that gleamed even in moonlight. Church folk whispered that each year, when the hymn Silent Night was sung, the notes warped and cracked near the Carter ruins, as though another voice hummed low beneath the choir. Children who wandered too close claimed they smelled iron and smoke, though no fire burned. And then there was the discovery. One spring, long after the war had ended and the chains had been broken by law if not by heart, a farmer clearing brush near the old foundation struck something solid in the dirt. He dug with his hands until he unearthed it: an axe. The blade was rusted, eaten by time, its handle split and darkened by rot. But when he wiped the dirt away, he saw letters carved faintly into the wood, letters worn but unmistakable. DC, the farmer dropped it where he found it. He said the ground grew colder in his hands, as if winter had come early. He never returned. The relic was spoken of in hushed tones for years, but no museum dared display it, and no church dared bless it. Some said it sank back into the earth, pulled down by the very soil that had drunk the Carter's blood. And still, each Christmas Eve, the whispers rise again, of a woman who would not kneel, of a silence that did not die. They tried to bury her in silence, but silence still swings the axe each Christmas night. What do you think, family, if you had lived through chains, through loss, through every cruelty like Dinah Carter did, would you have found the same strength to stand against your oppressors? Her story is more than horror. It's a reminder of how deep our people's pain ran and how powerful their will to resist could be. If her voice, her silence, and her fight moved you, make sure you like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so these stories are never forgotten.